Today's breakfast in all of our Minanim is sponsored by the children of Mrs. Chana Delamani, Hilchot Shabbat Chana Bat Abraham. Today's her Shloshim. Everyone's encouraged to please take food from our breakfast and make barachot. Leilishmata, tisku lemitzvot. We should only celebrate happy occasions at Hashem. Can you know what the halachot where we left off in regards to pikuach nefesh? Now there's an underlying. It should have really been the first class when speaking about these halachot, but there's an underlying debate or understanding when you're dealing with a sick person, a Choleh, on Shabbat. What's the status of Shabbat? There's two options. Is it still Shabbat? And the Torah just allowed us to break Shabbat to help treat this ill patient that needs our help? Or is it considered like it's Sunday? Obviously it's still Shabbat, but do we treat it as it's Sunday? And do we do everything as is, as you would normally do on a Sunday? Now what's the difference? Manaf kamina. What's the practical difference? The practical difference is if you can do something Shinuy, if you can do something in a non-direct way, indirect way, which we've explained many times, in the indirect melacha on Shabbat, a Shinuy automatically lowers the severity, lowers the degree of that act which you are doing. So if you can somehow do something Shinuy, do you have to? Should you? Is there an obligation to? So that's the question. And the answer is a big machlokes rishonim. Everyone tries to learn out from the Rambam what his opinion is. The Rambam is slightly vague. The Rambam begins his halachot of Perek Bet when he discusses the Choleh. He explains that it's doche, uses the word doche. But later on, the Magid Mishnah explains that really the Rambam holds that it's not considered Shabbat whatsoever. So therefore, Rav Ovadia agrees. There are some opinions. The Gra says no, it's still Shabbat and it's just pushed aside. But the Magid Mishnah and the Rav Ovadia both explain that really when in regards to a Choleh on Shabbat, it's not considered Shabbat. Therefore, we do everything as is. Everything normal, everything without any Shinuy, any indirect action, no changing, no doing any differences. We treat the patient as is. So Halacha explains, when you're doing the melacha for a Choleh, there's no obligation to change and do it b'shinui to minimize in the Chilul Shabbat. Why? You do it as is, normally in a normal manner that you would have done it on a regular weekday. The only exception to the rule is a yoledet, someone who's giving birth, a woman who's in labor. By a woman in labor, even though obviously she's in a life-threatening situation, giving birth is not something that's simple. Nevertheless, any way you can minimize in Chilul Shabbat, we do minimize when it comes to yoledet only, when it comes to a woman in labor, a woman giving birth. That we explained earlier has to do with the fact that the Magid Mishnah explains it's derech teva, it's the normal way of life, and it happens very often, so we try to minimize it when possible. But everywhere else, says Rav Ovadia, that there's no obligation to minimize the chilul when treating the patient and dealing and helping that person. An obligation to two people together, which we know is a lower level as well. Rav says if something's not direct treatment of the patient, you should do Shinuy. What's the classic example? A doctor who has to write a prescription on Shabbat in the hospital, he should try to do it Shinuy, minimize it. I know in Israel they say they have non-permanent ink, so doctors write a prescription on Shabbat and it erases in 24 hours. It disappears in 24 hours. That's what they use in Shari Tzedek, I heard. Also, the Rav Ovadia writes that wasn't a thing back then. So he said, if you're a righty, the doctor should write his prescription with the left hand. Those prescriptions, those things that aren't direct to treating the patient, you should try to do Shinuy to minimize the possible isur that you can do, but that's the word Rav Ovadia explains. And lastly, Rav Ovadia says, he explains that it's good to, whenever calling for help, it's good to do it Shinuy if you can. So in our case, back then they're picking up phones from the landline. In our case, if you're picking up a cell phone, instead of dialing with your finger, dial with your knuckle, assuming there's no delay in patient care when doing that. But this is a fundamental principle, and it's really one of the first introductions when learning halachot of a Choleh on Shabbat, understanding how do we view this sick person on Shabbat, and the practical difference is what it comes out with it. Rav Ovadia even has a tshuva, will end up with this, that if there's someone who's sick on his deathbed in the hospital, not even on deathbed, a Choleh that's in the hospital, the doctor said there's no difference whatsoever if he sits up or lays back down. And he says, I want to sit up, raise my bed, lower my bed. You're allowed to do it on Shabbat. You could do it. It's not a problem, even though it doesn't have a direct cause or direct help, a benefit for the Choleh. Because the Choleh is asking for help, and we view Shabbat as no longer Shabbat like a Sunday, you can do it. It's not without a problem. Just another example of this scenario. Have a wonderful day.